Here we go again. Hi, this will be an unusual video for me in a few respects, but I felt it worth making. There are a few things I want to address though, first being that this is being made in a similar manner to Unpolished Passion. While I look back on that video in particular with regret, I think the workflow I utilized was pretty good. Just writing out a script, doing adequate editing, and mashing it all together with just enough effort to not be offensively bad. This one's definitely lower effort than that, as should be evidenced by the unrelated, unedited Borderlands 2 footage in the background, but, you know. Second, I don't think it's appropriate to narrate this video in the same way I did the last one, even if it's harder, and the result is worse. It makes sense this time around, and to spell it out clearly in case it isn't incredibly obvious, I'm trans and I've known for about a year now. I wouldn't explicitly mention this unless it's directly relevant to the video or, in the case of Unpolished Passion's description, because I'm overly insecure about assumptions people may make about me based on how I sound. Point is, me being trans is directly related to what I'm talking about, and I'm looking to ramble on that experience in a certain context. Sorry for how bad the narration sounds, by the way. I'm not very happy with it either. It's not to say my voice is terrible, but, you know, it still doesn't sound as good as if I would just go with the other voice, you know? Whatever, this bit's unscripted, just fucking... I'll go back to it. Third, and this one's rather crucial, is that I haven't done any research for this. I'm speaking out of my league in many ways, essentially regurgitating things I've heard elsewhere or have otherwise intuited, but it's important enough to me that I honestly don't care about that. I want to make this anyway, and putting this citationless rant in video form will give it the most reach my tiny internet presence can manage. So let's go back a bit. I'm trans. If you are too, you probably already understand, but obviously many people aren't, so let me explain. Being trans brings with it a monolithic mental clash that's ever present and can only be resolved to any degree by pursuing a transition. This clash is present whether or not the person knows that they're trans. Personally, and this isn't the only type of experience, so take it with a bit of a grain of salt, I grew up 8 feet in the closet, completely unaware that I was trans for the longest time, and there was always an inexplicable disconnect between myself and every single one of my peers. It was horribly othering and isolating, and it led to crippling apathy and a fundamental distaste for certain actions of others, under the assumption that we, more or less, were the same. It conjured a thick layer of cynicism onto most lenses I tried to view them through, making everything these people did feel vain and fake. I couldn't understand the purpose of fashion, for example, because I was never able to feel remotely content with how I looked and thus never got invested in it, so I assumed others had that same experience but felt socially pressured into it more than I did or whatever. I don't think it's a stretch to assume that this happens to a lot of trans people who don't figure that shit out until 2 or 3 decades down the line. And honestly, how are they supposed to? Media representation is something of an icky topic with certain people, and I agreed for the longest time. Not for the same reasons, but I agreed nonetheless. For me, I couldn't connect to any character I had ever come across, literally any of them, and legitimately didn't know that someone could have that experience. By extension, it seemed pointless to worry so much about representation because, outside of normalization, it served a little purpose. I was clearly pretty ignorant, but that's beside the point. Because I had never come across any characters who explored how a trans person feels, and because my family and schooling sure as fuck weren't gonna fill in those holes either, I was never given the perspective to understand my position relative to others, and was left to assume that everyone mostly felt the same. That's not the case, though. That was never the case. And had I been presented a character who went through those same struggles, of feeling distant from everyone else, of feeling disillusioned with their peers' stereotypically gendered actions, of progressively being more of an outcast as they grew up in school, I may have connected the dots and realized that the difference I felt was an actual, real thing, and not me being on a high horse about maturity or intellect compared to these people who just didn't give a shit. So on top of providing a method for cis people to comprehend this stuff, it's vitally important to allow trans people to figure out who they are. Not only to realize they're trans in the first place, but to provide some solace in the never-ending, convoluted thought processes that we go through. To know that we aren't just worrying about nothing. And it's great for people to get insight into that even if they can't relate, because many assumptions about trans people are outright false. I fell victim to that, and you probably have too at some point.
All of this is why I've been so mentally preoccupied with A Year of Springs by NPCKC. I know this sounds like an ad, but it's not. I played this last night as of the time of writing. It's really been 2 days now. Oops. And it positively fucked me up in the best way possible, and I really think more people should play it. A Year of Springs in particular is a paid collection, but there are free individual versions of all but the epilogue, and I'd highly recommend going through them whether or not you're trans if you have a few hours to kill. In my experience, each one only takes about an hour if you're trying to be a little thorough. It's a really sincere series, and it's beautifully effective in what it conveys. A lot of it is about trans stuff, but not all of it. Regardless, it does a fucking fantastic job of covering what it wants to, and has genuinely helped my perception of this stuff. Funny links for it are in the description. Really do play this if you have the time. That said, it also gave me perspective on how little I actually know of other trans people's experiences, and that's sad. I want to know more so I can better contextualize my own thoughts and experiences, because while I've been confident that I'm trans for a good while now, I just haven't been able to articulate or even identify a lot of what that experience can entail. Games like these, or really any media that actually remotely realistically explores the experiences of a trans person, are really important to people like myself, and I just haven't engaged in anything like this for the year I've known this about myself. It's genuinely been a disservice. If you want a far better explanation of some of the concepts I've mentioned here, I'd highly recommend also watching the video Transphobia on Film, a look at Ace Ventura, Pet Detective by Malmrose Projects. She's a trans sociologist who explains in much more detail why specifically trans representation in media is important, as opposed to trans people just latching onto their preferred gender or whatever. Good video, good channel. Anyway, this video is kinda short and stinky, but I don't really care. I wanted to share this game and try to explain why something like this is so important and meaningful to me, and by extension, many other similar people as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please take the time to play those games if you can.